tier above everything else. And you look at these results, and you have to go, okay, yeah, Sultai clearly the best deck. It's miles ahead of everything else. It's the entire top 4 of this tournament. And it's hard to make that leap with us when we tell you that's not the case. I do believe it, but regardless, this is what we're dealing with. And it's Sultai ramp mirrors the rest of the way. We're going to be watching Ishibashi versus Horie here in the semifinals of the SCG Tour online. Players looking at their openers now.
Now, notably, Ishibashi has only 2 copies of Hybrid Crisis in the main deck, but 4 copies of Narset Parter Veils and 3 copies of Shark Typhoon. So we're kind of seeing something similar to Alexander's deck, where it's like got some flash elements. Only 2 copies of Nissa, most notably, I think.
Yeah, I think Ishibashi is leaning in that direction as well, trying to adapt to the mirror, figuring out what's best there, expecting a very, very inbred tournament and getting paid off pretty massively. And if I'm trying to pick the finals, I'm picking Ishibashi versus Gordon Brown in the finals. See if it plays out that way.
I'm with you.
Just doing the mana stuff early on. Here's an Uro on the side of Ishibashi. Or I believe that's Horie's side. I'm sorry. Uro is the answer.
Yeah, I mean,
pretty standard stuff.
One player's hand kind of sucks, and the other one's has 2 really powerful cards in it. So Aether Gust is going to delay this Nissa by a turn probably, but you know, Ishibashi's hand needs to improve.
Yeah, this still looks like a game which could get out of control very quickly.
And I think just 2 copies of Mystical Dispute as far as counter spells from Ishibashi. Otherwise, just Aether Gusts.
Well, this is the matchup where you're pretty happy with Aether Gust. There's that first attempt at Nissa. I'm going to go ahead and crack Fabled Passage. Little cycling, picks up a Narset.
Narset's not a bad draw if that can start to snowball into something productive. I mean, Nissa on the following turn is still going to check the Narset if Narset doesn't deliver something, but it is a hope.
Narset activation, going to find Tamiyo.
Yeah, that's no good. So Nissa's going to eat this Narset.
Yeah, just really need some way to... it's all about getting that first forward momentum going. And Ishibashi has a good mana setup right now. Certainly plenty of lands on the battlefield. But that first snowball piece, it's going to just be an Uro. Not your best start. You really want the snowball to start with Nissa. And you look how Horie is set up here. Nissa into Hydroid Crisis could be a really, really big swing.
Yep. It looks like Ishibashi is going to end up with enough cards in Graveyard to escape the Uro next turn. So, you know, again, if that can hit something like an Aether Gust to disrupt this Nissa into Crisis, then we might have a game on our hands, but the window is very limited.
I agree. Big draw steps coming up here. Just a land in the first draw.
It looks like Ishibashi is 1 mana off of Tamiyo, return Aether Gust, eliminate the island. I can't quite tell how many Water Graves are on the battlefield, to be honest. It looks like 3, though.
I think there's the full 4.
Oh, really?
I think so.
Oh, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
they've split now.
8 mana available. So we could see Tamiyo return Aether Gust, hit Nissa and draw step, eliminate the island to protect the Tamiyo.
That's not bad. Does not look like that's what we're going with here, though. It's going to be Uro.
Yeah, the issue with this play is if we don't find something to deal with this Nissa, Crisis is going to go pretty wild next turn.
Yeah, and unfortunately, just an island from the Uro draw. Going to put in an Overgrown Tomb tapped. Could have played Tamiyo here, but keeping up Eliminate instead.
Gordon Brown very quickly picks up game 1 over in the other match.
I am unsurprised. I think we're seeing a really masterful piece of deck building from Gordon Brown.
Yep. Very, very impressive. Even that extinction event is pretty good here. I might be tempted just to fire that off and just stop the Uro snowball in its tracks.
Interesting decision. Only one unknown card in hand. So pretty good information to make that play.
Right. You know, Tamiya is not really going to get off the ground since you were going to have 3 lands next turn that are animated 3/3s. It's going to be interesting to see which direction. Yep. Okay. Extinction event.
That is going to fully eliminate that Uro. And I think there was a moment there where we were thinking about eliminating Uro.
Yeah, it did look that way.
I can understand the consideration.
Yeah, I mean, Tamiyo activation basically gets you to the requisite numbers for an escape, so I mean, you should always consider your options. Totally reasonable.
Still a lot of mana left. Go ahead and make either a Shark Typhoon or a Krasis play. Kind of an embarrassment of riches here for Toru.
Yeah, this looks like it could be Krasis for 8, if desired.
I just say big number. I'm not trying. Let Arena figure it out. That's my policy these days.
I respect that.
You're going to let me call matches on Arena? I'm going to take full advantage of it.
Oh, I didn't even realize that Toru has access to Uro this turn as well. So this, yeah, like you said, an embarrassment of riches.
This is one of those spots where you're just trying to close out your opponent's outs. Think about how you could be punished the most. Try and prevent that from happening. Starting to feel like this game's slipping away from Ishibashi.
See what Ishibashi's got.
Krasis.
1 Casualties of War, so not a lot of potential to catch up on the battlefield, unfortunately.
Right.
And Mystical Dispute is an embarrassing draw step.
Not going to do much in this scenario. Here's Tamiyo. No fuel in the graveyard, so we're just going to try and hit something here. Extinction event sounds right.
Makes a lot
Big
of
whiff.
sense.
Not present in the top of the library, and that's just going to send the turn back to Toru. Now with Ether Gust back up, just keeps getting better. That's the way the snowball works. Take a few steps forward, and they'll keep coming.
Like you mentioned off air, you know, regardless of what your feelings are on the Sultai Ramp mirrors, they end pretty quickly. So this looks like it's going to be pretty painless.
Yep. Yeah, the closing speed is good. I will say, honestly, like I said, from a coverage perspective, I think these are interesting matches to cover. I do not hate them. I will take these over a lot of the other stuff we have been offered in the recent eras of Standard. I think they're legitimately interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they're really cool positioning wars. You're essentially trying to, you know, land this sequence of haymakers, typically starting with Nissa, but the way you get there is very interesting, and, you know, it results in really big punishes if you make a misstep, and there's a lot of potential for comebacks, you know, if you have stuff like Casualties of War to recheck Nissa. I mean, there is a lot going on, even though most of the games end the same way.
Yeah, and Toru just knows miles ahead at this point. Just going to go ahead and control that Tamiyo.
Yep, I like cutting off the Planeswalker. You don't need to get the game over with that quickly. Your opponent's almost out of resources, and you have a million things to do.
We ready for more escaping? Always assume there's 5 cards in the graveyard.
That's what we've learned today.
Usually there. I see a lot of blinking going on over in that area. And it is time for Uro. Grab a breeding pool off the top. As I mentioned, plenty of mana here for a Shark Typhoon. That's what Toru wants to do.
Yep, I think we're going to see a concession.
Yeah, just a concession from Ishibashi. And we're going to head on to game number 2. This game brought to you by my friends at Ultimate Guard. All my decks sleeved up in katanas. Love those sleeves. Absolute best sleeves in the business. Got a bunch of those deck boxes floating around the house as well. Of course, I usually use an arena deck list deck box, but the times I don't,
Of course.
it's Ultimate Guard every time.
Well, it just sounds like there's a partnership opportunity there.
Call me, Ultimate Guard. I'm here. You know where to find me. I will shill even harder. You think I can't shill harder? I will. Test me.
Yeah, you're getting a lot of work done during this whole time here. Trying to get new chairs, new deck boxes.
ABS, always be shilling. These players say ABS, always be sideboarding as they try and set up for these games 2 and 3. Who's got the edge here, Major? Do you see anything in either list that distinguishes it from the other?
Certainly, as far as a distinguishing factor, there's a Lockmere Serpent in Toru's sideboard, which is...
That's distinguishing. That's exactly the right word for it. Distinguishing.
An interesting piece of technology.
Yes.
So the recursion mode does stop Uro, technically, but getting it in your graveyard seems pretty tricky. So I'm not... I guess that was probably an anti-heavy blue strategy card. I'm not sure if they're bringing it in the mirror, but...
Yeah, it's weird. It feels more like a game closer than like an Uro check, and maybe you get some incidental Uro checks. I don't know.
We see on the right side of the screen that Toru did in fact bring in the Serpent.
Okay.
But, I mean, mostly stuff that we've seen all day. A couple copies of Negate, some Shark Typhoons, things along those lines. Nothing crazy, just, shoring up the interaction, getting rid of cards like Eliminate and such from your main decks.
Got an update from our other semifinal match. It sounds like Carl Surratt, Alexander Gordon Brown head to game 3. We'll have to see if our tournament favorite can hang on.
I have faith.
Me too.
Oh, the Elder Spell. That's an interesting card that we haven't seen in a while, but that's really powerful in combination with your Narsets to reset some of her loyalty.
Yeah, based on the way these mirrors are evolving, like at the start of this format, there's no way you would have talked me into including the Elder Spell. But I think the way things have moved is starting to make some sense.
Yep. Huge uptick in Narsets. Obviously, Nissa, super important card in the matchup. 2-mana answer for Nissa is totally acceptable.
Yeah, that's the reason why I ultimately came around on some Eliminates as well. I was a big Heartless Act proponent at first. Since moved on. This is a big agonizing remorse here from Toru.
Yeah,
I take Uro, the best possible target for that spell.
Huge, not only leaves with Ishibashi with a pretty weak hand, but is going to cut Nissa for at least 2 potential turns.
A lot of reactive cards here from Ishibashi. I don't hate it. It seems fine given that Toru's payoffs are very expensive.
Yep, and the presence of Shark Typhoon makes playing this style of game pretty acceptable.
Yep. Yeah, more reactive stuff on the side of Toru.
I mean, if both players have a high quantity of reactive cards like this, then I'd rather be the person with a Mystical Dispute than a bunch of 5-drops in my hand. So
sure.
I mean, this looks like an okay spot for Ishibashi.
Yep. I would keep my advantage bar floating right around the middle right now. Don't see any huge edges for either player, despite that very, very nice agonizing remorse from Toru early on.
Yeah, I think the question is whether Toru is just going to blink first and jam Nissa with the threat of getting punished by an opposing Nissa.
Looks like it. Nissa is the play. How does Ishibashi want to answer this? Plenty of options, obviously.
It's an interesting question. I mean, you might just want to kind of pseudo time walk your opponent with this Aether Ghost.
Yeah, with no payoff yet, you really wouldn't mind if this sequence was repeated on the next turn.
Right. I mean, there's no better target for Aether Ghost than Nissa, arguably an Uro escape, but...
Just going to instead maximize that Mystical Dispute. And I kind of buy that, too, because the way this game has shaped up, you feel like you're getting into a long one, and you could reach points where Dispute could be pretty hard invalidated.
Yeah, I respect it. both players are kind of playing this deep flash game, so to speak, then you definitely just want to convert your resources when you get the opportunity.
Right.
I wonder if we're going to see a situation where the person that blinks first with Shark is actually going to be at a disadvantage just because the other Shark can outsize it. But
interesting dynamic there.
Picking up a second copy is definitely a big deal.
Right. Ishibashi does blink first, but had the good fortune to draw off the cycling for the first Shark, a second Shark.
And Toru's ETB tap land in hand is actually a really big factor here.
Here comes that Shark.
Okay.
No such luck for Toru. Does find a Narset. It's an interesting one.
And I mean, it looks like this is just going to play perfectly into Ishibashi's hand. You know, a couple interactive spells and some big flash threats in these Sharks.
Yep. And here's the negate.
All right, I'm definitely surprised to not see the Aether Gust this time.
Well, you get another chance. Let's see if anything has changed about the equation here. Because, yeah, this seems like a great spot for Aether Gust.
Yeah, I mean, especially, you know, you have negate to cover it in the next turn, of course, so. I can't imagine. This is probably another consideration where cards in graveyard is a huge factor. It's like, does my opponent have the ability to go Uro and then immediately escape it? I think that's the only real consideration for holding your Aether Gust. I'm guessing that's the case given the ultimate play.
You could also get punished on the next turn, potentially, if your opponent has another counterspell in hand. You don't have perfect information here, so.
Sure.
Big draw for Ishibashi. Nissa, who shakes the world.
As she tends to be.
Post-combat. Wanted to take out that Shark.
Yeah, I like the play. I don't think, given the fact that Tor is at 9 life, I don't think they can really afford to not block the Shark, but I appreciate the sequencing. So I might see this Elder Spell come into play.
Yeah, and that's going to really be a hard punish for not having the negate at this point. Aether Gust not going to do anything about that. You do see that Mystical Dispute was picked up, so there's a bunch of permutations where this all goes very wrong.
Right.
Depending on how you play the last turn.
All the interaction is actually just so varied between these decks that getting everything to line up perfectly every game is basically impossible, so it's just a bunch of hedging situations.
Yeah. Yeah, that tells me that these are, wherever these mirrors ultimately settle, I expect it to be a very, very skill-intensive place.
Looks like a consideration for Aether Gust my own Nissa.
Yeah? I buy that.
Which, if your primary concern was Uro plus Escape, you know that's no longer an option. So this makes sense. I mean, your best draw next turn is probably Nissa.
Let's see. Could be a spot for Shark Typhoon. Take advantage of that Nissa mana.
Mm-hmm.
Just get aggressive here. 4/4 Shark. 3/3 creature.
Oh, interesting.
Go X's too. Okay. See what the card is, then think about Aether Gust.
This is going to play perfectly into the Mystical Dispute, though.
Yeah. Yes,
I mean, of course, if both players had perfect information, the way this would play out would be completely different. But, like, again, to reiterate, there's just so many weird different types of interaction that playing perfectly against, you know, open deckless opponents like this is just so difficult.
Right. And Mystical Dispute is going to get the job done for that Elder Spell. Nissa bites it. Narset off the top. Couple of good draws. Going to answer the Narset on the other side of the battlefield.
Yep, Ishibashi knows the last card in hand is Eliminate, so just another situation where you don't want the game to get out from under you. You don't necessarily need to put your opponent on a 2-turn clock.
Another Shark Typhoon. Love
Big
to
hit.
see it.
Yeah, I really like this dynamic where these Sultai decks are, loading up on interaction post-board especially, and then not only do your Narsets find your interaction, they can actually find your threats when you're playing a bunch of Shark Typhoons.
Right. Yeah, this is what I always envisioned these mirrors looking like. For a long time, they were just casualties of war nonsense. This feels a lot more like where we're supposed to be.
Yep. I mean, they really do feel like, kind of blue-black control decks in some sense. It's just you happen to have a little bit of ramp and some really powerful green cards.
Yep.
But looks like we're going to be getting a game 3 in just a moment.
Does appear that way. Gonna go ahead and make another Shark. Eliminate on Narset. Draws a Narset. Not bad. Easy game.
Not sure if Toru still has Extinction Event left in their deck, but that play kind of makes me think they do.
I could buy that. Saying that's the only out left anyway.
Yeah. Doing a quick mana check on something from Ishibashi's side.
Lead with Uro. Another Uro. Play another Uro. This one, escape style. And that will be the protection Ishibashi needs against even a top deck Extinction Event.
Yep, that should cut all the outs. Looks like even Hydrocrisis wouldn't be able to gain enough life to survive this attack.
Yeah, and Negate certainly not going to get the job done, and that means we are headed to a decisive game 3. Dynamic really changes in those sideboarded games. I love it. I love you see Toru has boarded out one of the casualties of war. As good as this card is in the mirror, you don't want it in large numbers. It's just not what it's about here. It has catch-up potential. You're not supposed to have 3 or 4 of them in your deck. That's crazy talk.
Yeah, I've poked fun at your disdain for casualties of war, but I certainly agree, especially in post-board configurations where these decks are loading up on cards like Mystical Dispute and Negate. You definitely don't want 6-mana sorceries in your deck.
Right. Interesting card on Toru's side. Elder Gargaroth makes the cut in the mirror. 1 copy, has 2 available, only bringing in 1. It looks like all the Extinction Events are out for both players.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of makes sense. If a lot of the pressure you're trying to generate in the mirror is just like some Shark tokens, it's just another powerful 5-drop that you can resolve. You're putting your opponents on not having Heartless Act in their decks, so right. It's not as splashy or as powerful as Nissa, of course, but it's still a very sizable threat that your opponent needs to respect.
Ishibashi, 4 Shark Typhoons.
Yeah, I love that
card.
Oh, look at the name of this deck. It's called Sultai Shark.
Smart. Yeah, giving up some of the Hydroid Crisis. I've rattled off how I consider that to be a bit of a sin. Giving up even some of the Nissas too, but can't argue with the result Ishibashi has seen. And this is just a different deck. Like we said, it's being built in a different fashion, a different look at Sultai control. We're going to get to the point of a healthy, balanced format where you could play Sultai Ramp, Sultai Control, Sultai Aggro. Is it just a matter of time? Sultai Flash as another option? Wow. Healthy format confirmed.
Yeah, I mean, this really is a Sultai Narset deck. Just all the ways that this deck is built, it's trying to abuse Narset. And we've seen throughout the day that, Narset can really cripple an opponent when they're leaning on, not only Uro, but 4 copies of Hydrocrisis.
Right. I wonder if that also informs Ishibashi's decision to cut down in the number of Crisis. Just everyone coming to the table with Narsets now. A little bit harder to make that card work for you. We've certainly seen it work enough times. In fact, I can't think of an instance where we saw an opponent so pressured by Narset that they just had a Crisis rotting, because the way the decks are built, you don't really find yourself in those scenarios all that often. But still, if there's going to be a lot of Narset around, it certainly speaks in favor of maybe trimming some Krasis numbers.
Yep. And in some ways, it really just might be, a conclusion that I want my deck configured a specific way after sideboard. And if I'm going to play 5, 6, 7 Sultai Ramp Mirrors, if I'm going to win the tournament, then I'm really just concerned about how my deck looks after board.
Right. Look at this keep from Toru. This could get real sketchy real quick.
Yep. Not only missing lands, but complete inability to even cycle these Shark Typhoons with no blue mana.
Right. Yeah, that's the real backbreaker for me. I am not sure I would have kept this hand.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan either. I don't even know what the real upside is.
What's the best case scenario? Like, it has to just be running lands off the top of your deck for a while, quite frankly.
Right, but even if you hit 3 lands in the row, I mean, we've seen the way that Ishibashi's deck is configured. There's no guarantee your Nissa's going to resolve on turn 4.
All right, well, here's a very timely Watery Grave. Just going to pass the turn, not going to play Uro. Almost certainly means we're going to see a Shark Typhoon.
I'm not sure I understand that line of play, to be completely honest. I don't see a lot of downside to just casting the Uro or cycling the Shark Typhoon. But perhaps I am missing something.
Well, we routinely do, so it's certainly possible. Shark Typhoon does seem to me to be one of the bigger payoffs. Of course, I mean, there's a hard punish, right? You get your short on lands and you get your Uro Ether Gusted. Yep. It looks really bad.
Shark Typhoon's a big pickup for Ishibashi. He's basically missing something to pair with his interaction.
Time for a little thought erasure.
On the bright side,
a second green source on the side of Toru.
Toru not having lands and a bunch of powerful cards means they're, kind of insulated from thought erasure in a weird way.
Yeah. I buy that. What are you taking here?
My instinct was Hydro Krasis or Shark Typhoon. Not the
I was leaning Shark Typhoon, but I wasn't particularly sure about it. There's that green source. Everything coming up Toru thus far when it comes to the mana base. Near perfect information for both players at this point, which is really interesting.
I'd like to just see Hydro Krasis for 3. I don't think you can... Given that Ishibashi's hand, Gust basically destroys your draw step once it targets the Nissa. Then they have the option of either disputing on the following turn or Casualties of Warring and getting a 4-for-1 on you.
Right.
So if they do decide just to jam Nissa, then I'd probably just bottom it if it does end up getting Aether Gusted.
Well, let's see how this turn plays out. This feels like a critical moment in this decisive Game 3.
Yeah, I mean, you just kind of need to work towards more land drops. So, yeah, I like Uro here. I think any play is reasonable except for the Nissa. And this might even be juicy enough for Ishibashi just to fire off the Aether Gust. Like, they know Toru's hand is not very strong.
The problem I see with that is if you miss your 5th land drop on your next turn. I think this game has the capability to get away from you in that scenario. Now, maybe this is just as impactful. Elder Gargaroth.
Ooh, that's an interesting draw.
It's a card that will eventually do some damage.
Okay, well, this could actually result in a big swing, because now Krasis for 4 really puts Ishibashi in a weird spot. Having missed that land drop like you alluded to.
Yeah, I think this still forces action. You're going to have to dispute.
Yeah, I agree.
Probably need to make a Shark for 1. I mean, you just can't miss that land drop again.
Right. I mean, you're not getting anywhere by holding out for a Shark for 2.
Still no land. There's the Watery Grave. Back up to 5 mana. Okay, now it kind of feels like we're at parity again, I think.
Yeah, Narset plus hold up Aether Gust for a big play.
Yeah.
This is gonna be a close one.
I agree. Wish I had some more information about graveyard sizes, as unsurprisingly they have again become critical.
Yes.
It's like 5 cards.
A theme of today.
Graveyard. Yep.
Do Brian and Michael understand that Uro needs 5 cards to escape?
Well, I think that Toru now has access to it with that fabled passage. But Aether Gust at the ready for Ishibashi.
And I really do think there's so many permutations for how Toru can play this. But again, like you said, the presence of knowing about the casualties of war and the Aether Gust just means that trying to play through these cards is going to be really difficult. But you just might not have any other options.
Yeah, this seems like it has to be the starting point. You know you can play that through the Mystical Dispute right now.
Notably, both players' Uro escapes are weaker now that Narsets are on the battlefield.
Right. I do have a result from our other matchup. And thankfully, we have not been made to look completely clueless as Gordon Brown defeats Serap 2-1, moving on to the finals with that very innovative take on Sultai.
Congratulations. I mean, obviously anything can happen in a match of Magic, but just that deck is so well built for this tournament, so no surprise there.
Yeah, so I actually caught up with Gordon Brown between rounds. He's over in our Arena Decklist Discord, and just basically said our assessment was spot on. You get mauled by aggro in game 1, built the deck to go ahead and challenge all these Sultai decks, and doing so very, very effectively.
Yep, that sick metagame call, really well built deck. But over here, more expensive sorcery cards.
Yeah, it's working out though, because Toru's hitting all of his land drops and Ishibashi is not. If Ishibashi was making land drops, his hand is well set up to fight through this wall of nonsensical spells that Toru has put together. But just not right now. Only 5 lands. 28 lands in Ishibashi's deck. I'm assuming that number is pretty well agreed upon at this point.
Yeah, I think that number is probably the most stock thing about Sultai.
Right.
So
start playing 29 just so I can be different.
Toru definitely has the option of escaping the Uro now, which honestly might be a fine path. It actually lets you double spell with Tamiyo. Sure, you don't get to draw a card off the Uro trigger, but I mean, it's still a threat.
Does have the downside of not giving you any clear uses for your Tamiyo immediately. Like, I think just buying back some of your higher quality spells with Tamiyo has a lot of value in this matchup. Looping your Hydrate Graces a few times can pull you pretty far ahead. Granted, there's a Narset on the battlefield right now, but long term, I like that plan.
Yep. I mean, it's even possible that Toru's, they know about 1 copy Mystical Dispute, so that might be enough incentive to just kind of play this as slow as possible and make sure that Ishibashi can't get value off of them.
They just stick a Tamiyo here and then get back an Agonizing Remorse maybe and get a little bit more information.
I think that's a really viable option.
Right.
Yeah, like you said, lots of strong cards in the graveyard.
This is going to draw a Mystical Dispute. Wants to force a little bit of mana expenditure.
Wow.
I don't want to call it a desperation play. That doesn't really describe exactly what it's doing. But spending 2 Mystical Disputes here doesn't feel great.
Yeah, so I think the tiebreaker for making this play is that this gives an opportunity to get a Shark on the battlefield, snipe your opponent's Nissa, and then presumably escape your Uro. And if you can do all that and leave up Aether Gust, that Ishibashi actually made some progress. Whereas just sitting back and missing land drops and having reactive cards that are going to become dead is kind of a losing proposition. So
right.
I think that was actually a really smart sequence.
Yeah, having seen this result, I am inclined to agree with you. Maybe this is the first step in Ishibashi starting to pull ahead, and finally that hand becoming flush with mana. Going to be key to make progress in this game.
Yep. And once you once you actually start to get ahead on the battlefield, this Casualties of War is starting to look pretty good. Yeah, I think that Double Dispute Shark line was just really great.
A lot of times these matchups just come down to maximization of mana. How do you get the most out of all your spells? Trading a Shark token for a Narset can be a really, really huge exchange that can change the course of the game. Ishibashi found it, starting to make a little headway. Let's see what this Narset can turn up, though. Still a lot of big options left in the deck for Toru.
I will say I'm starting to get less high on this Elder Gargaroth in this mirror match.
Not accomplishing much for you?
I mean, maybe it's the best use for the slot, but I'm not impressed.
I have the sense it's one of those like hybrid spots where it's not necessarily something you ever want in the Sultai Mirror, but you really want it in this one specific matchup, and it fills in your plan admirably in this spot.
Yeah, exactly.
Now find a Thought Erasure with Narset. Knows most of the hand contents at this point. There's a lot to control there. Going after that Gust can be a big game, but we're just going to jam Gargaroth.
Yeah, Thought Erasure doesn't suck. The problem is you really need to pair it with an additional card.
Right.
So if you can't make 2 plays, I do respect this, just playing one of the 5-drops from Toru. I don't think it's going to work out, but I agree with the assessment that you kind of just need to get some of the chunky cards out of your hand, and then next turn pair one of your powerful cards with Thought Erasure and force it through.
Yeah, it feels like Toru is about to get Casualties particularly hard here. Land would have been ideal to be able to hold up Ether Gust as well.
Still gets a shot at it.
Well, you have to kill the Narset first, right?
Yeah, if they do decide to commit to the Casualties of War, then they at least get a shot at it.
Right, they won't know before they take the shot.
Right.
That means there might be another viable option, and as you see, Nissa being pulled to the front here. I buy it. Well, let's just do both.
Yeah,
sure.
This makes a lot of sense.
Get as far ahead as possible. This is a good Casualties of War. I will give it up for the card in this instance.
Is it the 3-for-1 part, or being way ahead on the battlefield, or both?
I think it's that you're already ahead, but that's what I mean. Like, you could have configured another setup with this Nissa and these Tamios to do something like almost equally as impactful as what we've actually accomplished here. But still, I'll give it to Casualties there. Nice little swing. Hydroid Krasis off the top. Not going to do a whole lot with that Narset on the other side of the battlefield.
Yep, and I mean, this game's slipping away. Despite missing a bunch of land drops and having cards in hand that looked pretty ill-suited for the way the game was going, Ishibashi found a way to start to snowball the game. Really well played.
And Toru is going to be able to Casualties here, but doesn't feel like quite enough to me.
I agree, and to be fair, this is one of the biggest issues with Casualties. Like, sure, you can catch up to some extent, but you haven't actually gained initiative. If your opponent can then just untap and do something else equally powerful, you're kind of in a similar spot.
Right.
So sure, this is going to tag the creature land, the Uro, and the Nissa, which is, again, a huge deal.
It seems like it should be really big, but it's not going to be that big. Going to get Tamio able to reset pretty quickly after this happens. I'm assuming there's already 5 cards in the graveyard for Uro. There always are.
Oh, and this Tamio is going to turn off the Thought Erasure. That's actually a big deal.
Nice, yeah. You forget about that tech sometimes. Or at least I do. Static abilities on these Planeswalkers.
It's both been a while since Tamio was a popular card and Thought Erasure was a popular card, so I think it's excusable.
Right. Well, I'll do it whether they're part of the metagame or not. Don't test me.
It looks like with a land drop to give, we might even see Ishibashi go ahead and fire off a Thought Erasure from the graveyard. That might be what they were looking at.
Okay. Looks like step 1 going to be Tamiyo. No? Uro instead?
Uro.
Just always right to play Uro. You always have 5 in the graveyard, and it's always right to play it.
Given the presence of that Thought Erasure, though, I do think that Ishibashi will probably lean to just sticking this Tamiyo. Even if Toru plays Nissa next turn, I think that's not necessarily going to be enough.
Let's see what we find off this Uro. Just a land. Nothing too exciting.
A land does give the ability to play around Mystical Dispute with Aether Gust, which I do believe Toru has. Yeah, 2 copies. But I definitely like just playing Tamiyo here, given the presence of Thought Erasure.
2 unknowns on Toru's side. Are you afraid of Mystical Dispute? If you're the Tamiyo caster? How bad is that for you?
I mean, given that you have a backup copy in your hand, and the upside here is quite high, not only for generating card advantage, getting some traction with a Planeswalker, but also just blatantly turning off a card in your opponent's hand. I think that it makes a lot of sense just to take the mana efficient play.
Okay. Toru agrees. Gonna plus on Nissa. Didn't hit.
I think it's even worth noting that Toru only has 2 forests on the battlefield, so it's not like this Nissa is going to actually give a massive surge of mana.
Right, not much mana. Drew an Uro off the top for the turn. A lot of cards being negated by those Planeswalkers over on Ishibashi's side. Thought Erasure, now basically a blank. Hydroid Crisis, not going to do much for you. Uro, way worse.
Yep, definitely a great call out. This Narset's doing work, and in conjunction with this Tamiyo, really putting a damper on Toru's options.
Fine Mystical Dispute with a Narset activation is Toru.
Not the best thing for your opponent to know about on turn 12.
Right. Can usually play
wow. Okay.
And that's just going to get the concession, and that means our finals are